Hi there, and welcome to another wonderful episode. Today, we're talking with Jo Hudson. Jo is a designer, writer, and coach who helps wellness based entrepreneurs embrace their multiple passions and create a life and business on their terms. She is quietly unconventional. She is not only a designer, a coach, also a van lifer, later in life ADHD diagnosis person. And she also is someone with such a creative mind and unique approach to life, coming from being an architect to be a van lifer to designing her business and reinventing herself and thinking about different ways of living a multifaceted life, living a creative life, playing into her strengths and living life on her terms. That's all we're going to talk about in our conversation. So let's go and let's chat with Jo.
But before we start with our wonderful conversation, we just want to remind you about our Patreon account. Patreon is where we put our golden nuggets. Plus, we have been taking out snippets from very old episodes that we've had to get some wonderful advice from some amazing speakers. You can also connect with myself and Lenka on there. And this is a community where we will, moving forward, add content, create different things for you, but it is a place where you can start to find more life in your life. So come and see us on Patreon. But now let's find out what it's like as living in a van and all the wonderful wisdoms that Jo has.
Hi, Jo. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
Likewise, I've been following you on Instagram for a little while. I got your Instagram account recommended by a friend of ours, a colleague of ours. Shout out to Pippa Akram, who a while ago mentioned, was like, hey, I know you are interested, meaning myself, in van life, and that's the direction I'm kind of heading with my life a bit. And you're like, you definitely need to follow Jo. She's the kind of a person that really is doing this and is inspirational. So that's how I actually discovered you, Jo. But for myself, for Natalie, for our listeners, could you tell us a bit more about yourself? Not just with what I just mentioned, maybe van life is part of your journey, but who you are, what you do, something, to get us intrigued about what we might be talking about today in this conversation.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you. It's interesting because one of the words you said right at the beginning was multifaceted, and that is something that is very, very key for me, but it's also been a huge part of my journey. So one of the ways I like to describe myself is sort of quietly unconventional. I'm a designer and I coach for multi-passionate people. And that's not just because I'm multi-passionate, but because a lot of people that I speak to are, but often try to sort of contain themselves into quite a small version of who they are. So I typically work with people who need to do life and business are just a bit different to the norm, because that is basically my journey. You've already mentioned van life, and I'll get on to that because that's a very recent chapter in my life. But obviously, there's a lot that led up to that point. And I'd say it's probably my journey over the last 10 to 15 years that's the sort of most profound. And that has been ultimately a journey of stepping away from society's expectations and norms and just giving myself the permission to do life on my own terms. And permission is often permission in subtle ways. It's not sort of, that's why I talk about myself as being quietly unconventional, because it's not this loud, bold, gregarious, I'm much more introverted, but that permission giving of doing my own thing is often in the small moments and those small but significant decisions. So I guess backtracking a little bit, I worked in architecture for almost a decade. That was my training at uni, and that was what I did. And whilst it ticked some boxes in terms of that creative outlet, it was quite varied. I realized retrospectively that I never really did it for me. It was very much a way of trying to do something creative in a way that had status and it was validated, because I was quite academic at school, and the creative industries are something you do if it's kind of like being an artist. It's sort of not seen as valid in some way, and I realized that was what sort of the architecture route was for me. It was trying to sort of do what I wanted to do by way of my creative outlet, but do it in a way that other people could understand. And then in January 2013, I left that career. And at that point, I didn't really know what was happening or where I was going next. But one of the things that had come about recently in my life is that I turned plant-based way before the whole vegan thing was mainstream. And it was so much more than the food on my plate. It led me to ask questions about everything you assume to be fact. We're taught what sort of foods make up a balanced diet. And then when I began to question that, the ripple effect was that I questioned everything else. And it was like this, I guess, as Brene Brown would say, like a spiritual awakening or some kind of meltdown. But that really allowed my creativity to come out. So I launched a food blog. I had a health food business. I loved doing all the things in all of that. But design had always been my sort of outlet, I guess. But because of my own journey and because of the conversations I was having with people, the coaching side came into it as well. Another chapter in that sort of evolution was that I was diagnosed with ADHD 4 years ago now, I think, at the age of 37. So again, when you go most of your life feeling like you're a little bit different, but you don't really know why, that led to a lot of aha moments and, oh, okay. And that was at the very beginning of lockdown. So there was a lot of self-reflection, partly because the whole world had a moment of self-reflection, but I was in that phase anyway. And I'd always been a very multi-passionate person. I never wanted to pick one thing or one way of doing things. But the problem I had was I felt that if I didn't do what everyone said, pick this one thing, niche down, that I would be diluting myself and that I wouldn't be good at any of those things. That was the kind of conundrum I was finding time and time again. But I just had to kind of put that aside and decide that maybe I was just never going to be a one thing person, and maybe that would be okay. Maybe I would never be at the master of anything, but actually that amalgamation of lots of different things, you kind of like baking a cake, I guess. You put all those different ingredients together, but then you get this amazing thing at the end of it. That's that merging of all those things, you get that unique sweet spot. So I thought I'm just going to trust that process. And then during lockdown, I converted a van on my own. My dad helped me, but I had lots of time during lockdown. It's something that I'd been thinking about for a while. And I thought, well, if there is such thing as a perfect time, it's probably now. And as much as it's been a sort of a physical vehicle, but it's also helped me step into that sense of, I guess it's up-leveled me in that sense of doing my life in my own way. And all the things that had kind of come before, all the sort of thoughts I'd had, all the things that were in their kind of infancy of I guess growth, that sense of where I was going to push my life and give myself permission. It was the vehicle for that, literally and metaphorically. And I guess that leads me to where I am today. I live and work on the road, very nomadically. I'm still working hard to create a life first business that works around how I want to do my life and gives me the most sense of freedom. Yeah, so hopefully there's a few things we can dive into there.
Oh, absolutely. There's plenty things we can dive into, but you really wrapped it up nicely in what is aligned with us. Here at the podcast, we talk about, finding more life in your life. It's how do we put life first?
Mm-hmm.
And then business and career and everything second. How do we figure it out for ourselves, be it health and well-being and lifestyle and personal development, whatever is important to us, relationships, creativity, but have that in the forefront of our mind. And then the essential parts, the necessary parts of making some money and having some sort of a career or business, like have that supporting us, but not the other way around. So I would love to touch a bit on, you've been through this process for a while now, you've been exploring and thinking, how did you start putting it together, this puzzle? It doesn't have to be perfect, it will be evolving, we know that. But if you, and I presume you then work with people and clients and you see people around, how do we start putting together an unconventional life to step away from the norm, step away from the shoulds and from how it's always been done to, no, this is what I want for myself. This is how I want it. This is how I need it, because we often don't know.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when it comes to sort of the nomadic side of things, I think I was quite lucky in that most of my business at that point was sort of online. And the bits and pieces that weren't, I was able to sort of either phase out or shift or change. So in terms of the practicalities of becoming nomadic, that was already sort of sorted. And it's interesting as well because one of the things I did to, and I'm not quite sure if this answers your question, but it came up for me as you were talking. One of the things I did to give myself some space to figure out what I wanted to do, and this is kind of partly where van life came into it, is that I thought, whilst I'm still figuring out how I'm making a decent income, what if I flip it on its head and make my life so cheap that I don't need to earn that much to cover the baseline? And that gives me that space to explore and play. I know I'm in a privileged position and maybe different to a lot of people, and that I don't have a family. I have very few ties and things sort of, bearing on me in that respect. So not everyone's just going to be able to do what I did, but I stripped everything right back. And even now, my lifestyle is incredibly cheap. As well as traveling around in my van, I decided that, do you know what, I might not want to be in my van all the time. And I just dabbled with this a little bit a few years prior to the pandemic, was to house sit for people's pets. Originally, my plan had just been to do that as a free exchange, just as a bit of a change of scene from the van. But very quickly, I had so many inquiries that I realized in the January of 22, when I'd been on the road for about 6 months, that I'd need to charge for that offering. I'd turn it into a sort of a side element of my business and a form of income. And so that's been really nice to have as well, because it gives me that balance of being in one place for a few weeks to get a little bit of an anchor point, because that is difficult when you're traveling. It's a very untethered lifestyle, which, I mean, that's a whole other topic on itself. But it also provided that little bit of income again. So it gave me that space to explore. So I think whilst other people's lives might look quite different to mine, ask yourself that question in terms of what can I do to give me that space to explore, whether it's building something on the side where you've still got the stability of income, whether it's doing something voluntary. It can look, there's so many different ways it could look. For me, the spaciousness was stripping my life right back. But there's so many ways. And actually, spaciousness is interesting. I keep talking about that word. That was my word of the year a couple of years ago. And it's something that I really try to embody, because without the spaciousness, it's difficult to expand into that creative mindset. And one of the things about when I was in architecture, I think one of the reasons I was there so long, even though I knew it wasn't my calling in life, I was working such long hours. I just didn't have the mental space to work out what else to do. And for a long time, I told myself, well, I can't leave until I know what I'm leaving to. But if you've got no headspace to work that out, you're stuck in this vicious cycle. And I think there are a lot of people, for all sorts of reasons, who find themselves in that place. They've got no bandwidth to work out what their purpose or creative calling or, the next step is. But yet they don't feel like they can leave the current thing they know isn't right, because they don't know what that is. So it's a really tricky one to navigate, I think. So however you can create some spaciousness, I think, is key.
Yeah, it's the catch-22 of you need more space to be able to create more space, but to create more space, you feel like you need more space. It's the same saying for people who don't meditate. It's like, I don't have time to meditate. Well, if you say you don't have time to meditate, you need to meditate double the amount of time, because you really need to meditate.
I think also spaciousness, it can be in the micro moments. It could be being intentional on your 20-minute dog walk in the morning. I think a lot of the time maybe you're making a cup of tea and you're waiting for 60 seconds for the kettle to boil. Use that time to just check in and notice what's going on inside. Like, I don't think when I talk about spaciousness, what I'm noticing more and more in my life is that it's not about carving out a whole day to sit and journal or whatever it might be. It is using pockets of time and noticing what is coming up in those pockets of time. And I think that's so important, because it's so easy to think, well, there's no point because, I haven't got a life like her. I haven't got the space like that. It is using those small pockets and then noticing. And if there's something that's really pulling at you, maybe that's then a case of, oh, actually, could I carve out a couple of hours one Sunday afternoon when the kids are doing something else or whatever it might be? But it first comes down to noticing.
And a bit of selfishly, I would love for us to talk a bit about your van lifestyle and your maybe house sitting, because that's been on my vision board for a while, and it's finally coming to existence. But it is definitely also a lifestyle that I see a lot more people embracing, be it part-time, be it full-time, be it because they want or out of necessity. The moment you join some of the van life Europe, UK kind of a groups, you will realize how many stories are there of people looking into van life as part-time, full-time. I want to, I have to, I feel like I need to. But it's still overwhelming. So I would love for you to give us a little bit of an insight. How was it for you? Not only to imagine and build and design your van, but then figure out all the other aspects of hitting the road, working on the road, finding the right connection, finding a safe space to park, dealing with loneliness. I'm sure there will be lots of challenges, even from the moment you have the van and you're hitting the road, to be like, what am I doing? Like, what am I paying attention to? Is it what I wanted? I would love to know a little bit more about your experience with really starting with van life. And now obviously you've been doing it for a while. So maybe what you've learned along those years and you wish you knew at the beginning.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much to say. It's funny as well because I think even now I'm about 3.5 years into van life, and even now on a weekly basis, probably I still say, what am I doing? So I finished the van. It took me about 6-7 months to build over lockdown. Finished it in the summer of 21. And I think I was very naive. But I say that as not necessarily a bad thing, because I think sometimes in life, if we knew how tough something was going to be, we wouldn't even give it a shot. So naivety can be a good thing. So I didn't really know what to expect. The building the van. I mean, that was challenging, but I really enjoyed it because it actually almost a lot of the skills I learned in my architecture career, almost came full circle. I'm building this tiny house, and at some point, someday in the medium term, I will build a tiny home when I want to have more of an anchor, more of a permanent base. But it was so lovely to actually bring something to life that I could see so clearly in my mind. I have got a very clear mind's eye, but to stand in this space that I'd built to this vision, it was so incredible. I was so proud of myself. I still am. When I stand in my van, I'm like, this is my little home. And so I just thought, oh yeah, I can just park up wherever. I just do, just drive around, do whatever. At that point, I had no intention of taking over to Europe. I was terrified of driving the other side of the road. And I thought, right, there's so much to explore in the UK. I'm not even going to consider Europe. And I didn't. For my first Europe trip was last year, November. So yeah, I finished building the van summer 21. I didn't take it to Europe until the autumn winter of 2023. So there was a quite big time in the UK. It was challenging. I had a big mechanical issue a few months in, which cost me multiple thousands of pounds to sort out, to the point where the cost of getting the work on the van done was more than I'd bought the van for in the first place. But because I'd obviously put all that time and cost and energy into converting it, it was just it was just an awful space to be. And I did question, is this the right move? But I didn't have a backup plan. And again, sometimes it's nice to have a backup plan. It can also be very easy to fall back into, because I didn't have a backup plan, I thought I just got to persevere and just see where we go. And then I had an issue where I was parked up somewhere I thought was safe. There's a few different apps that people can use. One of them is called Park for Night. And it's just sort of a user type app where people share where they've parked, and it's got lots of reviews and things on it. And it was on there, and it was near an area that I'd grown up, so I kind of was familiar with the area. But in the middle of the night, I had a bunch of lads smash my windscreen, which was terrifying. And that really kind of knocked me. And that was in the very end. That was in like the November, towards the end of 2021. And I had to really kind of sort of sit with, what am I doing? Like, this doesn't feel, I haven't found my rhythm yet. And it took a long time. I think that was one of the reality checks as well for me, is that I just assumed I'd get in the van, it might take a couple of weeks of adjustment to learn to drive it, and then I'd be fine. But the reality of totally upending your life as you knew it, and the untetheredness of it, is really challenging. I often say to people, because people sort of say, oh my gosh, you've got an amazing lifestyle, it's like the ultimate freedom. And whilst I do, and it is the ultimate freedom, I think what sometimes people don't consider is that with the ultimate freedom comes the ultimate uncertainty. You cannot have one without the other. And I could wake up tomorrow morning and decide I'm just going to drive to Spain. I could literally do that. But the sort of untetheredness about knowing that I could go anywhere and be anywhere, and the fact that when you are so nomadic, it's very difficult to maintain connections by way of, your regular routines, your regular gym class, or, the mums at school you hang out with and have daily conversations. You lose all of these like consistent routines. And you mentioned loneliness. I feel like I'm jumping around a bit here, but loneliness has probably been one of my biggest struggles, and it's an ongoing struggle. I haven't got it sorted yet. And I think that's in part because, I am more of an introvert. And whilst I can do peopling when I'm already familiar, or someone might come and chat to me because they already kind of know me. When I'm traveling, I feel like it's the onus is on me to do the initiating. And I find initiating hard. I'm not the kind of person who just randomly, chat to anyone I meet, or just go sit in a pub on my own in the evening and just chat to people at the bar. I find that so hard. And so I'm having to really figure out, like work hard to figure out, okay, well, how do I make sure I have that sense of, like those human needs ticked in terms of belonging, in terms of connection, in terms of, finding community when I am so transient. And that is hard. And I think it's something a lot of van lifers struggle with. A lot of people travel as a couple, which kind of you've got each other, so that then negates that to an extent. Some people are much more extrovert, and so again will love just rocking up to a space and just being the life and soul. It's just not me. So loneliness has been a challenge, but sometimes I realize actually it's not necessarily a conversation I need to have. I just need to be in the energy of other people. So at those times I might just find a local gym and book onto a class, and just the feeling of being in a room of everyone doing the same moves, be it a yoga class or be it some kind of weights class, or just looking around and realizing we're all in this together. I might not have said a single word to any of those people in the room, but that tops me up in a way that I need, that is pretty much the same as having a conversation in a way. So it's things like that I've noticed that I've been able to lean on at times where otherwise I'd be very isolated. There's also lots of van life gatherings and meets and things, and you can kind of coincide to travel with other people. But again, everyone's so transient, trying to sort of overlap can be tricky. The reason I factored in the house sits, I think I mentioned this a little bit before, is that I thought it'd be nice to just every now and again be able to sort of, drop my anchor just for 1 or 2 or 3 weeks, because constantly moving every day is not just kind of challenging in terms of constantly having to find, the logistics of finding new places, but I often talk about my work, and I guess it's just probably work in general, is that there's kind of like surface level work and then the deeper level creative work, and I can easily do the kind of the stuff I don't have to think too deeply about. I can do kind of wherever I am. But if I'm wanting to like create something that requires me to really drop into that space, I can't do that when I'm constantly moving every day. I was finding it really hard. I could feel all that creative energy bubbling, but I couldn't ground myself for long enough for it to have an outlet. And so that was in large part why I decided for the house sits class. I thought, oh, great, I can be in one place for 1 or 2 weeks. And that's when I can have that creative time. And then when I'm traveling around, I can do the other types of work. And so actually that works quite well. And it's funny because sometimes I get to, a new house sit and chat with the homeowners, and they're sort of saying, oh, look, there's all these places you can go off and exploring. And I always say to them, I'll probably barely leave the house because that's what I'm wanting, that I'm craving that time just to hunker down and get stuff done. So I think they think it's quite strange, because most people, a lot of house sitters use house sits to explore new places. I just plan on staying in the house. And from a practical point of view as well, just sort of van life practicalities, getting my washing done and just doing a bit of van admin. When you're on the road, those practicalities like having hot showers and being able to do your washing and just all those bits and pieces that you can do effortlessly in a house, it's not so easy in the van necessarily. So it's nice to every few weeks have the opportunity to get on top of those things as well. So yeah, there's yeah, what else do you want to know about about my van life journey? There's probably so much I could explore.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, because I have been absolutely fascinated with van life for years. I devour the videos, and I mostly watch the Americans, especially the buses.
Yeah,
Van
schooling.
life, I like the buses. They're slightly bigger. And just the stories that they say, and a few of them do say it can be difficult, it can be challenging. It's not just, oh yes, look, we're here at a fun scenery, oh look, we're in the mountains now, or we by the sea. And they do, I'm seeing more and more van lifers are starting to say it takes time. It's really is that mind shift. It is finding a new way of life. So it's wonderful to hear you say it, to hear somebody who's actually experienced it and saying it other than a YouTube video. It's more personal, having you here with us on our podcast talking about it. But one of the things you really spoke about earlier was this simplifying your life and finding ways to create a lifestyle that suits. Now, as much as I am fascinated in van life, it's not been something that I've personally wanted to do, because I'll leave that up to Lenka to deal with. But I'm very much wanting to create something where you're not tied down to a house with most of your money going on to bills, whether it's mortgage, electric, insurance, this, that, and all sorts. And it's really trying to find a way to simplify, find a way to have more life in one's life without huge bills. And this is something that I'm looking into. I'm looking at a lot of different options and different ways of doing it. So I love how in the beginning you said it's van lifers might not be for everybody else, but running a house might not be for everybody either. So what can we do that's sort of in between? And this is something that I am looking at and mulling over and trying to see, does the UK cater for this type of lifestyle, or is this something that you need to actually leave the country to do? And that's where I'm at physically. I mean, I'm leaving the country in 2 weeks to look at a different country back home in South Africa, because I don't know if the UK can actually cater to this very simplified lifestyle. So I'd love to know how you finding it, as driving around in the UK, and just, I'm sure you've seen communities, and I get you when you say, making conversation with people. Yeah, no, you come to me and talk. But it's just be interesting to know, how can somebody who is listening find van life might not be it, but how can they bring their multifaceted creativity that they're wanting to embrace? What can they do? How can they find a way or start with this? Because I think it is, like you said, it's about bringing more life in one's life. And yes, you've got that job that's paying and you're on it, but you're not sure what to do, but you don't want to give that up. That vicious circle is, how can somebody maybe start? What can they do to start the process without maybe handing in their resignation just yet? But do you have any sort of tips or something on how somebody can just start when it's going like this, but then just want to find that space?
Yeah, there's a few things that are just sort of pop into my mind as you're speaking. So, but feel free to sort of pull me back on a different track as I'm talking, if you want to. But yeah, I think there's a few different things. Going back to sort of the spaciousness and the simplifying, I think there's physical space and there's mental space, and there's huge overlaps between the two. So whilst a lot of people, I think, understand because it's tangible, the simplifying in terms of physical space, getting rid of stuff and focusing more on experiences, or downsizing in terms of living space, whatever it is. I think people understand the principle of that. Intangible things are often overlooked because they are intangible. And it's easy to kind of like, oh, I'll come back to that. So that would be a starting point in terms of how can I simplify? What things am I hanging on to because I think I maybe should and they don't really serve me? So being really honest about what you're doing, be it in your own life, be it in your family, be it in your community, be it in the wider world at large. What are you doing that isn't actually serving you? And by letting go of it, it's not really going to significantly impact other people negatively, because obviously you don't want to kind of like make someone's life worse by letting go of something. But equally, understanding your own priorities and why you're doing certain things. And that could be in business, life, whatever. So I think having that, that's what the 20-minute dog walk in the morning could be thinking about, like, where am I holding on to things and doing things that maybe I feel I should, but don't serve me. And then, if there are a few things and those things are taken away, well, what space does that open up? What else can be created in that space? I think also from a practical point of view, so using myself as an example, one of the things I noticed when I took to the road was having too many meetings that were that required, so for example, we're having this conversation on Zoom on video, so I need good internet connection and that kind of thing. And I'm happy to do a few of those things. But what I realized I didn't want to do as my day-to-day way of connecting with clients is have fixed time appointments that had a need for really good internet, because I can't guarantee that when I'm traveling. And also sometimes when I'm working with a client, I want that processing space. If there's a question come at me, I don't always do so well if I'm having to think of an answer on the spot on a call that's happening in real time. So I do a lot more work with clients via Voxer, for example, when it's kind of asynchronous, when we can have a conversation over the course of the day, but it's a back and forth flow. I might be walking up a hill or going on a lovely hike, but I can still be working because it's just that conversation back and forth rather than sitting at my laptop. So I can still be offering the same service, probably a better service, because I'm offering in a way that works best for me. And actually a lot of my clients, I think, are also neurodivergent and often work best that way too. So it's working out, if you have your own business, are the ways I'm doing things, i.e. on Zoom, because that's what everyone does, particularly during lockdown, everyone was on Zoom. Or are there other ways that would better suit me to connect? And, my workflow, look at your workflow. What does that look like? Look at, if you have a full-time job, how are your evenings spent? Is there an evening a week or a couple of hours on a morning of a weekend every week or every other week you could carve out for whatever it might be? Maybe if you don't know what the next step is, it's carving out time to reflect on that. If you do have a sense of what the next step is, maybe it's expanding upon that. One of the things I really love doing more and more, and it works so well now, we're in the age of like AI and ChatGPT, is I'll often have a thought when I'm out on a walk or something. I do a lot of hikes, and I'll just brain dump that on the voice note. I can feel it flying out of my head, so I capture it. And previously I used to have to kind of like then go through it and work out what on earth I was trying to say. Whereas now I can just get the transcript and whack it in ChatGPT and say, can you make sense of this? What was I trying to say? And then my own ideas are reflected back at me. And it's great. So just capturing those little moments of insight. And usually you can feel it when you're onto something. Like you can feel it in your body when something feels true. Even if you don't know what it means or what direction it's going, or it might not make any sense in terms of the information, but you can feel there's something there that needs to be pursued in some way. So it goes back to the spaciousness as well. The simplifying, I think, in many ways is synonymous with the spaciousness, because we need that in order to work out the next steps. But also, like when you physically simplify a space, we're going on like the physical side of things now. I think that by its nature, just, it's like when you look at like a tidy, even if it's just a corner of a room, and you're like, it feels good. If you're surrounded by so much stuff all the time, there is nowhere where you can have that little respite from physical noise. It's really hard to let yourself drop into that kind of like, that deeper space. So I don't know if that's answered any of the questions, or I've gone off on a tangent, but the simplifying is the way to start, and allowing intuition, or whatever word you might want to call it, allowing space for those little things to come through, and just make sure you capture them. Sometimes they're so quiet, and little whispers of insights, little whispers of ideas that might not make any sense, but should not be overlooked. Yeah, I mean, I probably would never built my van if it hadn't been for, I mean, the timing was right, I get that, but equally, over a number of years, it's probably about 8 years prior that I first thought about building out a van, but I didn't do it because I don't really like driving, which I had to overcome that, because I was like, well, why would I choose to live in a van that I've got to drive everywhere? So there was a few hurdles that I had to overcome in my mind, and I realized they were just me getting in my own way. But it had been a thought that had been building for a number of years that I had just squashed before, because there was lots of other noise that was kind of speaking a lot louder. So listening to the quiet whispers is a lot of the time where the insights are.
Thank you. That's really valuable, and you know, as a society, it is very noisy. It's constantly busy, constantly radios going, TV's on backgrounds, listening to podcasts, you know, just noise everywhere, phones beeping with emails or messages or whatever. And there is this constant need to almost be entertained, because that silence can be quite overwhelming and scary, especially if you're not used to it. You're just used to filling it. So taking that time out and having that awareness that you want something to change, and then giving yourself that space to, I'm going to say, embrace the silence, but you're most probably going to have to be chucked into the silence, kicking and screaming, and your little brain is going, ah!
I was just going to say, embrace that, but embrace the discomfort that is going to come up, because it will. If you've been not listening to things and sort of denying the little whispers for a long time, when you finally acknowledge them, there's going to be a lot of feelings that will come up in that. Just so much stuff, and it is going to feel overwhelming, and you won't really quite know where to start. But the thing is, it's just being with it and just finding that over time, and it might be minutes or hours or days or weeks or whatever, but over time there'll be some clarity, and you'll be able to, you know, have less resistance to your own self. It's still a work in process. I'm saying that out loud, and I'm thinking, yeah, I still need to be like pointing that back at me, because I definitely get in my own way still. But it is uncomfortable.
I think we're all work in progress, and you know, where we're going to be next year is not the place that we are now, and that is part of it, is about the changing and progression and learning lessons and embracing the discomforts and just finding a way. But I think it is, well, this is very much my personal opinion, because I'm finding that it is a matter of making those changes and not living the normal, you know, the what is expected or the way you should, and is trying to find how to fit into a world that doesn't fit anymore. And I think there's more and more people noticing that and trying to work that out. And it's maybe not necessarily physically going van living, because it's not something for everybody. I love driving and I love the idea of going in a van, but I also do love the stationery and having a space that's there. So it's finding a way to create that lifestyle that you want. And if we look back in the past, I'm fascinated with ancient history, and I've watched all the documentaries and just seeing how we were as humans, you know, thousands of years ago. And I'm not saying that go back being primitive, but find ways. We were nomadic until what, I guess, the Iron Age, or maybe a bit before that. I'm not very good with dates. I just love history. But the thing is, we were nomadic. We did travel a lot. We didn't have these concrete buildings or brick buildings around us and then just stay put, and then you go to a job and then you come back, and whether it's raining, it's hot, it's sunny, it's winter, it's summer, you're just doing the same thing constantly. It was very much that you lived for nature, you lived for the seasons, you were more active in the summer, you were slower in the winter. And I think more and more people are trying to find that.
I think there's so much truth in that, because one of the things I have noticed as well since I've been on the road is that I'm so much more in tune with the seasons. So I know in the summer, I can have my dinner and then go out for a walk before it gets dark. Whereas in the winter, I want to be parked up and cozied up by 4 o'clock. And it and sometimes the sort of thing I'll do as well is that if I'm sometimes I often use like little campsites, the little super cheapy campsites. I don't really have any facilities because I don't need any facilities. I'm fully off grid, but it just gives me a safe place to park up. Particularly in the summer because often they're just like a field, and so in the winter they can be too muddy. Um, so when I know I'm arriving somewhere, I'll just look on my phone and just get the compass up and work out where west is. So when I arrive, I park with my main door, so I have the sunset. And then often, if I can be bothered, just before I go to bed, I'll swip the van round, and so I wake up with the sunrise. And so just being aware of the sunset and the sunrise and the time of the sunset and the sunrise and the quality of the light over the seasons and little things like some of the things that gives me structure when I'm traveling, when I'm on the road. I'll look at the forecast for the week ahead and say, oh, that's a rainy day. Okay, I'll schedule a day of working from the van. Oh, look, there's a couple of sunny days. I'll go on some big hikes those days. And I'm using literally the weather to guide because I've got that flexibility a lot of the time and how I can work. And not too many fixed appointments. I've got that flexibility. And I think finding ways to build flexibility. There's something else I was going to say as well in terms of rhythm. Yeah, also the other thing is if you're working a 9 to 5 job and you've got a lunch break that's a set time, you eat within that set time, but that might not be what's optimum for your body. So if you've got the opportunity to notice when you want to eat, what kinds of foods in small ways. I remember years ago when I was in my kind of health food blogging era, and I had an obsession with porridge. I still love porridge as like a meal. And I'd often eat that for dinner. And I remember someone saying to me, you can't have porridge for dinner. Like, that's breakfast. And I was like, well, who says? Who says a certain type of food has to be eaten so a certain type of meal? But we have that, we're wired in that way. And it was so liberating to be like, I'm going to have porridge for my dinner. And that's what I mean about these small things we can do for ourselves to begin noticing our own balance, giving ourselves that permission. Because once we get used to doing it in the small ways, we can do it in the larger ways. So there's a lot to be said for finding your own rhythm. And I think a lot of the creative energy can come from that space as well. We're not doing things in this regimented way across all of the seasons of the year or all of the days of the week. And it might be that depending on the nature of work or family life, that there are limits to how much flexibility you can give yourself. But again, if you can find a small way in which, just notice, are you an early bird or a night owl? And use the first hour, or which end of the day, to do the thing for yourself. Yeah, there's so many ways we can better tune into our own rhythm when we override the noise.
A lot of that could be, cultural, because when you were talking about what is common to eat for porridge, if you go to Southeast Asia, if you go to places like Vietnam, Thailand, Philippines, their breakfast food is not something we would have considered breakfast food.
Yeah, it's like noodles and stuff. Yeah.
Noodles and rice and meat
Yeah.
and stuff, and we would be like, this is lunch or dinner.
Yeah,
This is
exactly.
not breakfast.
Yeah.
And when they would look maybe at the, continental European breakfast or the British breakfast or the sweet and healthy breakfast, they would be like, what is this? Like, this is not food. You cannot start day with this.
Yeah, true.
And I totally love that you were talking about with living with the seasons, because I've noticed that in the past couple of years that the moment we come to now the change of clocks and autumn, that I realized that I don't want to be necessarily working after 4, 5 p.m. when it gets dark. I don't want to be looking at the screen. I want to have candlelight. I want to have flickering light. I want to have books and ambient music. And I don't want to work. I don't want to be sitting in front of my computer working. Where in summer, because the days are so late, like I have to put an alarm on 8 p.m. to be like, it's time to turn off the laptop because you will still have sunlight for the next 2 hours, but your brain will not have time to switch off properly. So 8 o'clock, it's pushing it. But my energies were different. So it's incredible, to whatever means people have to truly listen more to their own cycles, to the nature cycles, to the world cycles. I really, really love that. So next, we kind of touched on the topic of health and well-being and wellness. And I'm curious to know, with time, has your idea of wellness and well-being and healthy lifestyle evolved? You touched on your plant-based
Yeah.
moment, but be it being on the road and having more of this alternative, unique individual lifestyle, but also with, years and experience, has your idea of what living a good, healthy, balanced life evolved over the past couple decades?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And it's something like, I guess I haven't really sat and thought about that recently, because I do remember when I first switched to a plant-based diet, which was around about the end of 2012, so sort of a year before I left my architecture career, and that was kind of the pivotal thing. Initially, I remember sort of feeling quite lost insofar as I'd made this huge change. And interestingly, someone asked me a question recently. It was in an interview, and sort of said, how did people around you react when you took to van life? And I said, actually, by that point in my life, they were like, oh, that's just Joe being Joe. When I switched to a vegan diet, that caused a lot more reaction. Bearing in mind, this was before it became a mainstream thing. There weren't all the options in the supermarkets. And I found that really challenging, because I'm a people pleaser, right? I mean, it's definitely back then I was. I didn't want to be seen as this doing this obvious thing that was different. I didn't like going into restaurants and having to ask about the menu. It was just really challenging for me to sort of assert myself like that. And so I was trying, desperately trying to find my community and find, people who got it. And there were a lot of I don't want to use the word militant vegans. There was just a lot of very passionate, if you don't do it perfectly, you're not a proper vegan. And that never sat right with me. I think I came into it from less from the ethical point of view and more from the dietary point of view. So that's why I tend to use the word plant-based rather than vegan, because some people would shoot me down. And it was challenging because I didn't feel I fitted into that community either. And well, who are my people? And it was I was really lost for a few years. And it wasn't just the food thing. I was exploring all aspects of what wellness meant to me. I would have been just coming into my 30s, and now I'm early 40s. And so just in terms of my own biology and what my body needs has massively changed over the last 12, 13 years. And that's something I'm sitting with right now. I was speaking to a massage therapist in recent months, and I said, I want to be doing, in terms of exercise, diet and things, I want to be doing the best I can for my body now. So in another 40 years, I've still given myself the best chance of good health, which there's a lot we can't control about health. But what we can control, I feel like we almost owe it to ourselves, because, this is the only place we have to live, as cliched as that sounds. And so that's become a thing now, is that how I train now in the gym, I want to be, at the back of my mind, I want to be thinking, is this going to serve me in another 40 years? Or am I doing things that are going to, am I sort of working myself too hard because I can handle it now, but what will I look like in a few more decades' time? So I think that's what's a couple of things. I think is one, that any labels I've let go of, or I hold very loosely. And I'm thinking much more of a bigger picture in terms of, I want to be well now and in 40 years' time, as far as possible. And I think that's probably the biggest things and I think that might allow you to be more intuitive as well. If I was sort of hell-bent on, I must eat in this certain way, if my body was craving something else, I wouldn't listen to it. Whereas now, I was having a conversation with someone the other day about, hypothetically, I haven't gone down this path yet, but I was hypothetically thinking, I wonder if it would be beneficial for me to reintroduce fish into my diet. I haven't done it yet, don't know if I will, but I wanted to make sure I was not doing something because a decision I made 13 years ago to eat a certain way. Was I doing it because that's what I was used to doing? Or were there further questions I should be asking of myself? And I think, every now and again, every year, every few years, any kind of thing we've got into a kind of routine around that's become default. The way I eat is just my default now. I think we need to question those things, because it might not be the best option for me anymore. It might, but I kind of need to know that. I need to be intentional around it. I need to be aware of what best serves me. So holding everything very loosely and very lightly, I think, is the way we can allow things to evolve. Otherwise, we're in that constant resistance, that battle within ourselves of, this is what I do, this is how I said I was going to do it. And then it's hard to change because you're in that battle. Whereas if you just hold everything very lightly with a constant sense of curiosity around, well, what would best serve me now? I think that's kind of where the answers are. And I think it also means you're more compassionate to other people. Not everyone has to do things the way I do. Whereas if you're so strict with yourself, that tends to be projected onto others as well. And there is no one way to do wellness. There isn't. There is no one way to work out at the gym. So if we hold that sense much more lightly, and I think that's the answer to so much stuff, not just wellness. It's like the answer to life, isn't it?
One of the themes that I've noticed with guests that we're having, it is about taking that responsibility for ourselves, not
Yes,
just
that's a good word.
relying on others to fix us, the NHS here in the UK to fix us, parents, blame everything on parents, your job to fix, there's almost this complacency of, well, they need to fix me. And I'm noticing more and more, it's this taking responsibility. Okay, what can I do for myself? If I'm not happy in this job or with this business, what can I do to create the changes to make the difference? If I'm not happy or I'm feeling unhealthy, what do I need to eat? What do I need to take out of my diet? Do I need to change the way I'm doing things? And that's coming more and more. And I think also this is why more and more people are like, well, let's find my way of living, have that way of finding that routine. And as you said, it's not one size fits all, but it also changes. Just because something worked 13 years ago, it doesn't mean that it will work now. I mean, 13 years ago, I was very happy to be pumping weights and doing aerobic exercises. Now you won't even get me. You say aerobic, I need to lie down, because my body has changed and my lifestyle has changed and I'm older than I was 13 years ago. So it is allowing yourself that what's working now is great, but looking back at it and thinking that doesn't suit me so much anymore. It's I used to be very much more of a night owl than I am now, and now it's more of a morning, and I'm like, what the hell's going on? So it is just finding, and it's great how you've really acknowledged and shared that it is about finding what works and taking responsibility for it, and looking at fish works for some people, fish doesn't work for others, but it doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just is what is for individuals. And I love how you've really shared that, and also shared how looking at the big picture, but also what's now, not what was 13 years ago. And also, showing people that to have the courage to be different, because when you are trying to be an outlier or create that different life, you are a weirdo, or what's the matter with you? Why do you want to do that? That's not who you are. How are you going to deal with it? How are you going to cope? These things that are said to us, but it's mine, it's me. So leave me alone. I want to go do what I need to do.
I think the hardest part as well can sometimes be when you're in that like phase of evolution, when you're not yet sure of yourself, because maybe you're in a phase of transition, maybe you're in a season that is uncertain because you're moving through to something else. I think that can be the most challenging time, because often, I mean, I very rarely get anyone sort of talk badly about van life. I mean, I've had good experiences in terms of other people, but if anyone does sort of share their confusion, or if they don't get it, that can be projected onto me. If I wasn't secure in how I was living my life, I'd be like, I would go off in a right old wobble. And there are areas of my life that I am less secure around, and I know if someone projected their own fear and insecurity onto me, I'd be more likely to succumb to that. And I think when you're in a a phase of transition, it's being very mindful about who and how you share that with, because if you know that it feels a little bit all jiggly inside and you get some bad feedback because it's their stuff that's being projected and that might land badly with you, try and minimize, so maybe, I don't know, if you're starting up some side hustle, maybe don't go and tell all your work colleagues about it, because some of them, it's going to be their own stuff and their own jealousy and whatever that shows up. And if you're not yet solid in who you are in that part of your life, that could throw you out, and that could derail you for weeks, months, could derail the whole project. So I think being really mindful about, I don't know, hopefully that's come across, I don't know, it's just a thought as I've literally kind of thought that as I've been saying it, so it's probably not that well articulated, but I just know the way I receive other people's energy when I'm secure in an aspect of myself versus an aspect of myself that I'm not secure about, it lands very differently, and it can lead to very different outcomes and a lot of noisy head thinking. I am an overthinker, so it's something that's I often have to just be very careful around, I guess. And I think that's probably the same for a lot of people. We don't know who to listen to, and sometimes external voices feel a lot stronger than our own.
And we love thoughts that are being thought and spoken at the same time, because I think that is the most honest that comes out. It hasn't been diluted or censored in anything. So we love it when the brain is going and the words are coming out. So thank you for that. And yeah, that is really valuable advice for anything, is that sense of being judged, and when others put their own thoughts or biases or projections onto you, you can feel like that judgment or that insecurity. So thank you. That is good advice, is just being mindful of that it's their stuff and you are dealing with your stuff, and to keep it as yours. So that very valuable. So one of the things that we always love, Lenk and I, is we give this space as a gold nugget space. Hop on to our Patreon account to get this episode's amazing and wonderful gold nugget. Thank you so much for sharing your time, sharing your experiences and your journey with us today. I mean, it's been really wonderful to get to know you a little bit, to actually speak to somebody who is doing van life. I've seen a lot of videos, but they're there. You sometimes need to speak to somebody. So thank you for that. And I'm sure Lenka has got a lot from it as she starts on her adventures. So if people want to get into your circle or find out more about your journey or just learn about you, where can they find you?
Two key places, really. My website, which is createwellbeinglimited.com, and Instagram. Out of all the social media platforms, Instagram is where I like to hang out. And I do tend to post daily stories, particularly when I'm in more of a travel chunk. I tend to talk about travel chunks and house sit chunks. I'm in a house sit chunk at the moment. And yeah, I share daily. I'm very raw, authentic. I'm a sort of speak to think quite kind of person. So it all comes out on my Instagram. And that is, I am Jo Hudson.
Thank you so much. And for our audience, what have you got from our conversation today? Is van life something that you are interested in? You've watched the videos and you're thinking about buying a van and building it up? Or is van life just a little bit too much out of the comfort zone and a bit too out there for you? But are you trying to find ways to just have a bit more rhythm in your life that suits you, that suits the way you want to be living? Are you starting to crave those spaces or crave the slowness or finding something different? What have you got from today's conversation that we've had with Jo? We would love to know your thoughts and ideas, and maybe you have some great ideas about how to start to find a different way of living, find a different way to step out of the norm and create something that's special. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to know your thoughts. And until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Bye.